Hi, I'm Captain Jim McNamara. I'm the A300-600 Fleet Manager at the Flight Academy, and I'm here to talk about an accident that happened to an Airbus aircraft that is very similar to our A300-600s. On July 31st, 1992, at 0642 Zulu, the crew of a Thai Airlines A310-300, operating as Flight 311, initiated an approach to runway 02 at Kathmandu, Nepal. Weather conditions at Kathmandu were IMC. Visibility was below 3,000 meters with heavy rain. Thai Airlines procedures require at least 3,000 meters visibility for the approach, but allowed the crew to continue the approach until reaching the outer marker. Kathmandu is a non-radar airport. ATC services are provided by a control tower and an area control center. The initial approach segment took the crew from the Simara NDB to the initial approach fix, an unnamed intersection 16 DME from the Kathmandu VOR. Communications with ATC were in English, but standard phraseology was not used by the crew, resulting in some misunderstandings during the initial segment. From the initial approach fix, the approach to runway 02 requires a descent to 10,500 feet. Then a series of descending steps approximating a 6.4 degree approach slope. At the target airspeed of 160 knots, this would require a 2,000 foot per minute rate of descent. After descending to 10,500 feet, the crew encountered a flap fault when attempting to extend the flaps beyond 15 degrees. This fault was enunciated by a message on the ECAM display and illumination of fault lights associated with the flaps on the overhead panel. In addition, a status indicator showed the flaps to have stopped their extension just beyond 15 degrees. This flap problem prevented the crew from beginning the approach letdown from 10,500 feet. Between 16 DME and 13 DME, the crew asked for clearance back to Calcutta, a decision in keeping with company and performance requirements. They knew they had to have full flaps by 13 DME for the steep final approach segment. But 21 seconds after the flap fault occurred, the crew was able to rectify the fault by retracting and then reselecting the flaps. But they were now 12 DME from the VOR. The crew determined that it was not possible to continue the straight-in approach because they were too high. They notified the tower that they wished to start the approach again and requested a left turn to Romeo, the 41 DME fix off the VOR. This was an unusual request. It probably resulted from the misleading depiction of Romeo as the starting point of the Sierra approach on the company's supplied approach charts. The actual initial approach fix is the unnamed intersection at 16 DME. The controller instead issued a valid clearance to carry out the Sierra approach, but did not include either the Romeo fix or a direction to turn. Essentially, he was clearing the aircraft to turn back to the initial approach fix. The crew did not perceive that they had a new clearance for a second Sierra approach. They believed they were being instructed to continue the present approach. The crew responded that they could not land and repeated the request for a left turn to Romeo to start their approach again. After 4 requests for a left turn, the crew of Flight 311 initiated a right turn from a heading of 025 and commenced a climb from 10,500 feet to flight level 180. They notified the tower controller. The tower instructed the flight to descend back to 11,500 feet. The crew complied. While the crew was in the right turn and nearing the Kathmandu 202 radial, the tower controller cleared the flight to the Romeo fix and instructed the crew to contact the area control center. To proceed to Romeo, the crew needed to stop their turn and proceed southwest on the Kathmandu 202 radial, but instead, they continued the right turn and traveled toward the north-northeast, completing a 360-degree turn. On contact with the area controller, the crew stated that they were heading 025 degrees and requested direct Romeo to begin the approach. The center controller did not comment on their heading and instructed the crew to report over Romeo. The flight crew then began to reprogram the flight management system to display Romeo or Samara on the map display. However, the display was in arc mode and could not show a course to Romeo. Arc mode only shows a VOR deviation display, not the map display. At least some of the crew's repeated efforts to input Romeo in the FMS CDU appeared to be successful, but they did not accept or execute this information. Apparently, the crew mistakenly expected Romeo to be ahead of them. The flight continued on a heading of 025 degrees until about 16 nautical miles north of Kathmandu, when their heading was altered to the left to 005. With the autopilot engaged, the aircraft continued this heading at an altitude of 11,500 feet, shown here as the blue dashed line, in a clean configuration at 230 knots. They were overflying mountainous terrain, shown in yellow, that was 1,200 to 1,600 feet below, and received no GPWS warning. The published safe altitude within 25 nautical miles north of Kathmandu is 20,800 feet, 9,300 feet higher than the altitude of the aircraft. At 17 seconds before impact, the GPWS sounded a warning. Terrain, terrain, pull up, as the aircraft approached a 16,000-foot mountain. The flight crew reacted by asking ATC for clearance to turn back. ATC requested the crew to stand by until it completed clearance instructions to another aircraft on approach. 4 to 5 seconds before impact, power was increased. The engines began to spool up and the aircraft gained about 30 feet. The autopilot was apparently still engaged and the aircraft heading was never changed. The aircraft impacted the mountain at about the 11,500-foot level. Because of the topography near the accident site and aircraft performance limitations, impact with terrain likely could not have been avoided even if the crew had reacted instantly to the GPWS warning. All 99 passengers and the crew of 14 were killed on impact. The tragedy here is that had they simply executed a missed approach in the navigation mode of the autopilot, the aircraft would have flown the published missed approach procedure, entered the holding pattern, giving them time to regroup and set up for another approach. They instead attempted to build a new missed approach procedure by abandoning the approach midway, got confused while they were both busy with the computers. The aircraft ended up doing a 360-degree turn, and neither of the pilots was aware of their present position and or the aircraft flight path.